I'm Brian Simmons. I'm the Vice President of Communications at the Arcus Foundation, and on behalf of the Foundation and all of our collaborators on tonight's event, I want to thank you for coming out and joining us. I'd like to say just a few words about Arcus Forum before we get started. About 18 months ago, we had some discussions at the Foundation about how to enhance the impact of the frontline work that our grantees do. And with support from Kevin Jennings, our executive director, and John Stryker, our founder, we decided to move ahead based on our belief that elevating a public discussion around the issues that we've chosen as the focus of our work could affect the environment in which our grantees are doing their work in a way that would enhance the impact. And we decided that we wouldn't simply decide how to convene these forums and determine their content alone, and that we would issue an RFP for proposals twice a year to determine what these forums were, and that we would also be open to doing them in collaboration with others. And when we received the proposal that resulted in tonight's event, it was pretty clear to us right away, even early in our evaluation process, that this was a conversation that had to happen. So I am particularly delighted at the fact that this is a collaboration of a number of organizations, and I do want to call out a number of people who were instrumental in pulling this all together. We want to thank Chase Strangio from the ACLU LGBT and AIDS Project, Amy Fettig from the ACLU National Prison Project, who I had the pleasure to meet just a few minutes ago, Urvashi Vad and Cindy Gao from the Center for Gender and Sexuality Law at Columbia Law School. We congratulate them on the conference that they've built out for this week. Chris Daly from Just Detention International, and Harper Jean Tobin from the National Center for Transgender Equality. Now, the kinds of conversations that we want to provoke have value beyond New York City audiences. So we're also streaming this event so that people who aren't in New York and are maybe in some more remote place in the United States will have a chance to be part of this conversation as well. And so for that reason, instead of asking you to turn off your phones, I'm going to encourage you to keep your phones on and to silence them, but we encourage you to tweet throughout this event. You'll also be able to, those of you who are watching by live stream, you can submit questions at Arcus LGBT using the hashtag Arcus Forum. And in consideration for the people who are watching via live stream, for those of you in the room, we're going to ask that you, if you need to get up for any reason during the conversation, to please do so by the aisles on the side and not through the center aisle. You know, transgender identity and experience have become so much more visible in the United States and elsewhere in the last couple of years. And that visibility is really very exciting. It also, of course, has its dangers. There are dangers that it presents for some in our community, but generally it's a good thing. But we're also pretty confident that that familiarity, we still lack a depth of familiarity regarding the experience and concerns of transgender people. And so what we're hoping to do tonight is go just a bit more, get deeper beneath the surface in terms of exploring and understanding that experience. And we believe that awareness is going to be very enhancing over time to all the other work that people are doing on the front lines. So with that, I'm going to turn the stage over to Rashad Robinson, who will introduce our panel, get our discussion going, and I thank you again for being here, and I encourage your participation throughout, and we'll look forward to connecting with you at the end of the hour.
Welcome. How are we doing tonight? Great. It's a pleasure to be with you all, to have this conversation in this moment. It's of no surprise that over the last several months and over the last year, issues around criminal justice have become heightened in our country. There's been a heightened awareness around police brutality, around the injustice in our criminal justice system. And we've seen those issues play out in our media. We've seen those issues play out in communities around the country. And we've seen greater calls and greater concerns for what Americans can do to make things better. And at the same time, we've seen this heightened sort of awareness and this heightened understanding of transgender people and a greater visibility for transgender Americans all around the country. And one might think that those two things sort of moving at the same time could get us into a better place around criminal justice issues that impact transgender Americans. But for anyone who's worked on the front lines, working to amplify the voices and the stories of marginalized people, we know that that does not happen on its own. It only happens when we build the type of powerful movements that takes the type of cultural presence that communities can have in moments like this and work to build the type of cultural power that brings about real change. Cultural presence does not equal cultural power. It did not equal that for the civil rights movement of the 60s. It certainly did not equal that for the gay rights movement of the 90s. And for this new era of transgender visibility and criminal justice reform, it will not equal that on its own. And so we're looking forward to a deep discussion about what we all can do to move the conversation forward, to move the needle forward on these issues that we care about. And we've got some amazing experts. Quick note, unfortunately, Cece McDonald, one of our panelists, fell ill today and is not going to be with us. We wish Cece nothing but the best, and we look forward to having her here in New York in the future. But I want to just open up by reading a little bit from the bios of our fantastic panelists and then letting them jump in. And they're going to talk a little bit about what brings them to this work, not work around advocacy alone, but really the work around criminal justice reform, the intersections of transgender visibility and really working to impact our criminal justice system. So Kylar Broadus. Kylar is the Senior Policy Counsel and Director of Transgender Civil Rights Project at the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. Actually, you guys changed the name. We changed the name, right? I'm on the board of the task force. I should know this.
That's all right. And LGBTQ Task Force.
LGBTQ Task Force, absolutely. And Broadus was just named to the Out 100 by Out Magazine. Kylar. Janetta, yes. Janetta Johnson hails from Tampa, Florida, and has been an activist and advocate in the transgender communities of color for 15 years. She recently survived 3.5 years in federal prison and is now committed to developing the strategies and interventions to reduce recidivism rates and to develop effective plans of reentry for transgender community in and getting out of custody. Ms. Johnson served as the TGI Justice Interim Organizing Director in late 2008. Janetta. And Shannon Minter. Shannon is the legal director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights, one of the nation's leading legal advocacy groups for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Minter has litigated cases on behalf of transgender prisoners seeking to access medical care, including the first case to result in an injunction ordering prison officials to immediately provide an incarcerated transgender woman with hormone therapy. Been on the front lines of many of the major cases that we've seen in our movement over the last decades. So let's jump in. I'm going to start with you, Kylar.
Well, this issue is near and dear, particularly prisoner cases, because I've been a practicing attorney and actually represented a lot on the front lines just in trials and actually doing cases pro bono for years and years, particularly when being trans wasn't cool and didn't make the headlines. And I was out in the Midwest not pretending to be a cowboy, but being one, driving my car around from jurisdiction to jurisdiction representing trans people and getting trans people out of jail when we were being incarcerated in jail in the middle of in the middle states, and when Shannon would call me or Lambda would call me or whoever would call me and there would be a trans person in jail. And also for the fear that I knew I was one day away from jail, that they could pick me up just as easily as they could pick anybody else up, that I knew by being a trans man of color, a black man, that I was one day away from jail. Because that I would walk to court at high noon and little old ladies would hit the wall with grabbing their purses because I'm a black man in America. And that's the reality of being a black man in America. And the high rates of black males incarcerated in this country. So it is very much a part of my reality. It's very much a part of realities of black families in America, that people that are incarcerated, they're part of your families, that my trans sisters and brothers, we see the sister part right now, but that all of us are susceptible to being incarcerated. And that I was so easily stopped that people react to me and follow me around in department stores, and that because I lost my golden handcuffs from corporate America when I transitioned, but I still had some of those remnants of it, and that my car would be so easily stopped, even though I'm high yellow, as we call it, after the vestiges of slavery in this country. We still have those color classes that still go on in this country, but it doesn't matter what shade you are. If you're brown, you're brown. You're still black in this country, and you're still treated that way, that I would be stopped by police officers all the time, even driving while black, walking while black. And so it was very apparent to me of how susceptible I was to the system, even to where I was challenged by my bar license by judges. How dare I come into their courtroom while being black and trans, that I had to fight for my bar license. So everything was a fight, and so that I was very aware of that, and that I needed to protect other people that were much more vulnerable than I, even though I was vulnerable. So it's very near and dear to my heart, so other people don't have to be in the place that I am, and that this is what it's like being black in America and trans.
Once I realized that I was going to jail because I had committed a crime, I sold drugs. That was part of when the economy changed. When I went in, my immediate response was reentry, recidivism. How do I take this negative experience and take it into something positive? And I took the opportunity to talk with engage every transgender person that I met when I was in custody. And I also, did a lot of advocacy work around supporting the transgender, getting a little bit more, just making observations about the poor treatment that transgender people were receiving. And so all my energy was focused on reentry, and being a person that prior to, I worked as a case manager, substance abuse counselor, just worked in various capacities, getting out after doing 3.5 years and thinking about reentry and getting out and trying to access reentry services and the challenges that I faced. And I said, oh my God, if I'm having this experience, I could only imagine what everybody else other experience, because, I have a history and background in training people how to advocate for themselves and stand up for themselves and, be a voice for themselves. And and I spoke with my coworkers, and I'm like, we got to start a reentry program. And one of the things, I've always had that vision, but one of the things that really inspired me was I went to a talk with Michelle Alexander, and she spoke about, how we are abolitionists and believing in getting our people out and bringing our people home. And my whole thing is bringing our people home safely, because the transgender community faced so much physical, sexual, psychological, emotional abuse while in custody. It is unbelievable. I could sit here and share this with you. However, you wouldn't believe how much trauma and abuse is imposed on transgender people during their time in custody. And it's just, and also at TGIJP, which is where I work, we do a prison correspondence program where we correspond with people that are in custody. And it's just like, I think about, all the recent murders and all the recent things that have happened where Aisha in Chicago, she had to fight some people off from attacking her, and eventually somebody got hurt, and she was placed in custody. And corresponding with some of the girls in the custody, it's just like they were like writing us and saying, I know this must be really difficult for you guys, because of all the stuff that's going on and all the murders, because this is like this year, the most transgender people of color have been killed ever. And so it's just that, the most important thing for us to do at TGIJP is bring our people home safely and make sure that they receive adequate, culturally competent medical, mental health services based on a lot of the trauma that we experienced during our time in custody. So that's something that we've been working really, really hard on. And it's like now things are starting to come into fruition about the program to develop. And we've been able to work with some girls and bring them out and support them. And we go with them to their appointments and hold their hands and advocate for them. And they'll try to set up appointments 30, 40 days later, and we're like, no, we're gonna sit here, we're gonna wait because we need an appointment today. It can only be a 45-hour session, so we'll be right here when that session is over. Just really, really doing some strong advocacy around bringing our people out of custody and keeping them safe. I mean, we've went to jails and prisons to pick people up as soon as they get out of custody. We bring them in and, we let them know that they have a family, that we're there to support them, because a lot of us have family that are not available or whatever. It's just so it's important for us to support our community in getting out and getting stable so we can support them in not returning back into custody, because it's a very, very fearful experience to come out and not have anything and not have nobody. And we as an organization, we're their family, we're their loved ones. We want to be there when they get out, and we don't have any money to do that, but we do it.
Yep. And we're going to get to some work around our reentry later in the conversation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I just want to say I feel so fortunate to be up here with, I think, two of the most creative, visionary leaders in our movement. And Kylar especially has been a mentor to me as a lawyer and an advocate for a really long time. So I'm very proud to be up here with you all. I feel like I have been just so lucky. I grew up in a rural part. It was a very violent culture, there was racist violence. I lived right next to the town where James Byrd was killed and dragged to death, and sexist violence, homophobic violence. I identified as a lesbian as a teenager and had very, violent experiences in my school. But so I went from that to law school and ended up right out of law school in San Francisco, which is just one of the most vibrant grassroots transgender communities in the country, probably in the world. People were organized, and it was like a huge educational experience for me. And we had the support of local and then increasingly state government, and it just made a world of difference. I mean, people are working on every issue relating to criminal justice you can imagine. Stopping criminalization of people with HIV, trans women with HIV. We're stopping violence against immigrants, transgender immigrants. Community United Against Violence, like doing the kind of community-based support of trans and other LGBT people who were targeted by violence. And working with the Human Rights Commission to pass some of the first non-discrimination laws in the whole country. We had the Tom Waddell Clinic, which you get free health, trans people could get free health care. I mean, so that has been my inspiration and model to see how that can work on the local level and to try to make that a reality, nationally.
Great. So I want to get to some aspirational pieces. The reports that that are out there, and we've got questions from the report. Really digs into a lot of the challenges. But so often in these conversations around criminal justice, people ask, well, what do you want? What are the demands? What would things look like? And so much on whether it's the reentry side or even on the policing side when it comes to issues related to trans, gender folks, there is actually like not necessarily communities always to hold up, right? This is the model that we want. And so, Kylar, I want to start with you and specifically talk about the sort of policing policy piece of that. And let's say I was creating the policy. Let's say, because we might not have it. Let's say I was creating the policy. And what questions should I be asking? What things should be on the table? What pieces should be held up to ensure that we're thinking holistically around these issues and thinking about some of the concrete harms that continue to exist?
Well, I think one of the harms that exist is that trans people are profiled. We're profiled and we're not protected, particularly trans women are profiled as sex workers, and I think that needs to go out the window, and we need to profile people as people, as human beings that need protection, and that clap needs to happen, whoever did that, because that's the sad thing that we profile all our trans women as sex workers, so, and I just hold on to her because it feels like a good thing to do. And so that's the first thing, and we've got some inroads, I think, a little bit with organizations, but I think we have to take it away from organizations and make it about people and human beings. And so, yeah, Department of Justice has done some stuff. I think that's good. I don't mean to diminish that. But I think
what have they done that you feel?
They've worked with community activists and some organizations, and they've worked with the National LGBTQ Task Force, the National Center for Trans Equality, and many other organizations to provide a 20-hour training and law enforcement officers that are friendly to the trans community have helped create that training as well. That's available for law enforcement, and that rolled out in March of this year, 2014, for law enforcement. That's just 20 hours, though, and there needs to be much more. That's a minimum. That's a floor, okay?
Yeah.
That's a minimum. But there needs to be so much more. We have thousands of police officers out there, and there's so much misunderstanding, and we see that all over the place because our bodies are always subject to questioning, subject to groping. It's not just trans women, it's trans men. Whatever I do and whatever interviews I've done over the last 20 years, it always comes down to the one question: what's under my clothes? What does that have to do with you interviewing me for this interview or this panel? And that's always the issue, and it's always the issue whenever I go in to see a prisoner. That's always the issue, because if they haven't looked me up yet, I always pretend and wait and never let them know who I'm representing so that I hear what they're going to say about my client. And they do all sorts of things, like deny my client use of the phone or whatever, until I have to fight them and get the judge involved if I haven't got to that jurisdiction yet to make them allow my client the use of the one phone call, for example, because then they'll say all sorts of horrendous things about what they have captured and so on, and the gross inequitable things. So there need to be some sort of protection, number one, for the prisoner that's trans, that is basic. And I probably lost the question you've given me because I'm a little heated about the way that trans people are treated in general by police.
Yeah.
And there just needs to be some level of respect and courtesy and understanding, and there just isn't enough of that we're treated like some sort of thing. Yeah. And I even have fear of police. It's just like immediate. Being black and being trans, I go the opposite direction. And you'd think, well, gee, I go in a courthouse and used to go in a courthouse every day until just a little over 6 months ago when I wound down my practice. I still go the other way. I don't want anything to do with police officers, even though I tried to mediate and bond that, and that is because of that. And there is a lack of that, and so that's where we need to begin, and there needs to be this breakdown of that. And we saw that in Ferguson, and actually she used to live a mile from the spot where that broke down in Ferguson, and that climate is so accurate and true to what you saw on TV, and the relations between black people and the police in Ferguson is very true. Because it was like that when I lived there. So you add all these layers of ism together, and that's what you have. So how do we unwind that? And I do think that there has to be honest dialogue, and I think we're seeing that now. And I'm not opposed to, and this is Kylar taking off his hat as an organizational person and as an individual, sometimes we have to take it to the street to get that message across. And so I think that maybe that's where it is, but I think we have to have these dialogues to break that down. And we have to have more police in the room, or they have to get this message. But I think we have to have more community building.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're at, and that's why one of the things that putting back on my National LGBT Task Force, they've allowed me to do my Stop Trans Murders campaign there. And that's why I've started that, because we have to have all people engaged. We can't have an entity and an organization engaged. We have to have people engaged to have this community build up, to take the community at large and own this and say we as a community are not going to tolerate anybody treating another individual this way. And that's what that campaign is about, is just educating people that we don't stand for this. Because it used to be a time that if you attacked somebody on my block, that wasn't going to go down. And we protected everybody on the block. And I don't know whatever happened to that time, but it's time for us to stand up and be that time now.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the work that you're doing at the task force. 12 trans women murdered this year so far.
Just this year,
Just this
so
year
far,
so far.
that we
You brought
know
it up as
about,
well.
because people are misgendered, not identified, not reported, and families don't know where they are, and that's just that we know about in the United States, and that we sit calmly by and think that's okay. It's just not okay. I'm
Absolutely.
sorry, I'm on my soapbox
No.
anger, because it's just not okay.
No, it's a soapbox, okay. You brought up Ferguson as well, and each of you brought up sort of the intersectional nature of these challenges. That it's not just one thing. That you can't separate the economy and class from the criminal justice system. You can't separate race. You can't separate gender. You can't separate place and sort of where we end up from a geographic perspective and how that informs our opportunity or our abilities. And I just want to hold up before I sort of move to the next piece that from an intersectional place, as someone who's spent a lot of time on the ground in Ferguson over the last several months, as the leader of Color of Change, there are a series of things that are just not being done in terms of just tracking data, right? We're not tracking data, we're not disaggregating data federally, and the federal government can do a whole host of things to incentivize good policing that they're simply not doing. And in terms of whether, and that I think comes to the type of coalition work that we should be doing. And I want you to talk a little bit about some of the coalition work, some of the challenges with building coalitions around this. In some places you found some success.
Yeah. We're beginning to work with several organizations around reentry and really supporting the transgender community and really just sort of kind of giving people language and understanding on how to support themselves and keep themselves safe. It's just, it's all about safety. And I sit here and I listen to the conversation, and based on my personal and professional experience as a transgender person, there's been such poor treatment of transgender people that we don't even know how poorly we've been treated, because any little thing we get, we think it's okay and acceptable, I just think that the most important thing for me is the safety of the transgender community. And I realize that there's other vulnerable populations, but my focus is on the T, and really because it's just been so much stuff around that's been happening in the T community that has not been good, and transgender people are coming up missing, and there's no helicopters going up, looking around and scanning the areas and finding out, seeing if they could find a body or whatever. It's just, yeah.
And thinking about some of the movement and change that we have seen on some of these issues, this is the 20th year anniversary of Farmer versus Brennan, and which was a case that some say isn't always considered an LGBT rights case. It's more of a prisoner justice case or a criminal justice case. But Dee Farmer, a trans woman, defended herself up until the Supreme Court when the ACLU stepped in, and prisons can be held accountable for turning their backs on violence, on sexual violence, and that but we are here 20 years later. right? We have seen the proliferation of the prison industrial complex. We've seen the privatization of prisons. We see some of the gross negligence and human rights violations that continue to exist inside of prisons in this country, and a real lack of conversation around alternatives to incarceration. Can you talk some about sort of where we're at from sort of a legal perspective, 20 years later, sort of the ongoing work and fight in this space?
Yeah, it is incredible. I mean, Dee Farmer is such a hero in our community and should be so much more widely known. And that case should be considered one of the most important LGBT rights cases ever brought. But as you noted, it's more thought of as a prisoner case. But I mean, Dee was a young trans woman. She committed a nonviolent offense. She was in a prison in Florida, but she stuck up for herself, and they did not like that. And the prison transferred her to a maximum security facility in Terre Haute, Indiana, and put her in with, a very violent male population, and she was brutally attacked. And she did. She took her case pro se all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, although the ACLU Prisoner Rights Project did represent her when it got up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that was her case, was the case that established for the first time that prison officials are responsible for protecting prisoners who are violently attacked. It's not a perfect standard by any means, but that established, the prisoners can't be, quote-unquote, deliberately indifferent. But what is so frustrating is that 20 years later, well, for one thing, Dee's still incarcerated and still has subsequently been attacked many more times, but the problem is still completely with us. I mean, the legal remedy is theoretically there, but it is such a daunting task to try to represent individual prisoners. And you know what? The conclusion that I have come to, and a lot of other people have written about this, is there's no way we can reform the current prison system in a way that's going to make it humane for trans people or for anybody. I mean, it is a racist, destructive, inhumane system that exists in order to hurt people. So, we really do have to, while we have to keep doing the best we can with the legal tools we have, we really have to do the kind of stuff that you guys are talking about, the community-based organizing, the reentry, the economic opportunities, and just rise up as a movement and say, you've got, no, we will not accept incarcerating so many people, and we will absolutely not accept the brutalization of trans people and others in the prison system.
You want to jump in?
I just wanted to throw in them. I mean, ideally, prisons are not good for people, particularly trans people. However, in the interim, right now what's happening in California is they're designating 7 prisons, and the transgender community can only be housed in those 7 prisons. And they say as for a security issue. However, I mean, the thing that I feel like in the interim, it's, once again, I'll reiterate, it's about keeping our people safe. And the thing about it is one of the things that we're trying to work on is creating a Bill of Rights so that in these 7 designated prisons, transgender are being treated by trans-friendly medical and mental health professionals, because it's just like there's a lot of things that go on within the transgender community, and you can't be honest with the medical and the mental health people because they'll lock you up, quote unquote, for your safety, which basically prevents you from participating in any early release programs. And also, if they're going to house transgender people in those institutions, I feel like there should be reentry programs that go inside the prison to really support the transgender community in transitioning out of prison, because the criminal justice system and the CDCR is primarily set up to help men with children and wives get out of, to transition out of prison. I mean, I sat in this group that for 9 months, they tried to teach me how to be a good husband, a good father, and it's just like I didn't identify with any of that stuff, but however, I had to sit through it in order to be eligible for this early release program and not complain, and it's just, if you're gonna house us like that, I feel like we should have culturally competent reentry services to support us coming out, because it is really, really difficult getting out of custody. I'm very fortunate because I have my family here with me, actually my sister and my niece, along with my extended families here. But it's so many people get out of custody that have nobody to go to, you know, and it would be nice if they are familiar with the services in their area that specifically provide services for the transgender community. And also, I mean, in our writing, a lot of people write us from Iowa, Utah, and all these places. They're like, oh, I don't know anything about transgender services. Can you guys help us find services? And we basically go on the internet and do the best we can and make some phone calls and send them whatever information they need in order to best. And a lot of times we're very apprehensive because you also got to be careful of what services you're sending people to, because some GLB services don't provide services for the T.
True.
You know, so.
Yeah.
Are we going to questions?
No, I do want to, we were going to go to questions soon, so I want to make sure that people are teeing up questions. I also want to say that we're taking questions through Twitter as well. So if you have questions via Twitter, we'll be sort of taking those. I guess someone's going to get them up here because they told me that I can't tweet and talk at the same time. They don't know me, but I can.
And I was just going to chime in on some things that we can do pre-entry that I think would be helpful.
Yeah.
You know, pre-incarceration, which is where attorneys.
And so by pre-incarceration, do you mean, you know, alternatives, alternative sentencing,
Exactly.
jail, sort of the pre-trial process, or are you talking about programs that like
diversion programs.
Diversion programs.
Is what I want to talk about, and this is where training the bar and the bench comes in, and we have lots of work to do in training the bar and the bench. And trans work, which is why I stay involved in the ABA just for that purpose. And that's not been a bad thing, and I think it's an important thing to do. Training about diversion programs, and for some of you, everybody in here may already know what that is, but for folks that don't know what that is prior to when somebody comes up, which is what I would do as their lawyer for sentencing, my job is argue to the judge why they shouldn't go to jail. And so my job would be to say, gee, it doesn't make sense for this 17-year-old to go to prison, judge, because they're just going to learn how to become a better criminal. And I would do that on lots of cases for 17-year-olds, or for folks that it doesn't make sense to put in jail. And the same I would do for, say, a trans person if it didn't make sense, or if they didn't really commit a crime. But also I think what happens is there's a lot of bias in sentencing trans people, number one. They shouldn't be there in the first place. So if we do a lot of training, more training with police officers, that's one tactic, but also with law enforcement, because then hopefully, lawyers and judges, that we can use some of these diversionary programs to not have people go to prison to begin with, and get alternatives to sentencing to where they are doing either house arrest or work release programs or some other type of programs that are better. Sorry, got the mic there. It's programs that are alternatives to sentencing. And I think that in jurisdictions that allow that those are better than locking people up if we can get those types of programs.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we should be advocating
absolutely.
for that.
So each of you have laid out, you know, a series of sort of policy solutions, where we should be heading, sort of, you know, many of this sort of over-the-hill sort of ideas, right, that if we were doing more of this, if we were doing some of this over here, if we changed some of these things, we could potentially make things better. We could start moving ourselves in a better direction, even in the midst of a lot of challenges. When I opened up, the reason why I talked about the difference between cultural presence and cultural power is because simply being present in the space, simply having these issues sort of elevated, doesn't necessarily get us any closer to achieving them, to sort of having the type of coalition, community, and cultural power that moves something over the line. And so we've got a room here of people who who came out tonight, who will touch other people. We've got folks, you know, who are watching us through stream, and hopefully people who are participating in social media. And so to this captive audience and to the other captive audiences that you're going to be in, what are we asking from people? How are we asking people to engage in the next steps? What do we need to start driving these conversations forward, especially as we look at a moment in time culturally where people are thinking about what we change around the criminal justice system, and if we don't put things on the table that involve transgender people, we may not get anything.
Well, I think the first thing is people being educated about transgender issues. That second thing is to make sure that they go out and educate somebody else. A third thing is that they volunteer, and particularly in law enforcement areas or arenas that impact trans folks. They can be, what do you call the volunteer cops program?
Cop Watch.
What is it called?
Cop Watch.
Cop Watch,
Yes.
and those sorts of programs. Because one person does make a difference, and it is amazing, and that sounds Pollyanna, but hey, I'm a country boy, whatever. But it does make a difference if you volunteer and you interact, and it's amazing how one person does make a difference. And I used to go in places and be stealth when I could be stealth, just to learn and see how that would work out. And if you're in there and don't tolerate certain things, one person does make a difference. And I think those are some of the things, plus the things you've already heard us talk about. And if you're educated in a certain discipline, going into that discipline and making sure your discipline doesn't allow or has a non-discrimination policy, such as if you're a realtor, or if you're a counselor, or some of those things would be some of my suggestions. Or if you're a bar association, you know, I'm a member of a bar, so if your bar association doesn't have a policy and you don't have training or speakers bureau, I would suggest doing that. Those are some of the things.
I'm gonna push you all a little bit. What should we be asking from the major gay civil rights groups? What should we be asking from the major LGBT civil rights groups? What should we be asking them in this moment? Given the reports that are sitting out here, given the fact that we are sitting on this stage in a year where 12 transgender women have been murdered, and we are not having any type of national conversation, but we do have a moment where there's cultural presence, where there's more transgender people on TV, there's more conversations about transgender folks. Like there is cultural presence like never before. What are the demands? What do we say now is the time that we need? What do we need people to do? Yes.
I say that we ask the people to merge with us and band with us and basically demand with us that that we provide better quality of support to the transgender community. I say that specifically African American transgender women of color, I mean, growing up in Tampa, Florida, you know, having the every opportunity I get to talk with an African American transgender, I do the best that I can to find out what's going on, what are our issues, what are our similarities, what are our differences, what drives us, what stops us. And I feel like we have been so pushed back and so pushed down that we need affirmative action. You know, we need some type of affirmative action to where people just really raise up and sort of kind of like give us the support and support us in supporting ourselves in a bigger way. I mean, and that could be like more political education and empowerment, and just helping us understand the social injustices that have happened to us over the years, and help us come out of that mindset, and so that we can really find our true value and worth as human beings. Because at one point in time, society has dictated to us based on their behavior and their reception towards us, and just walking down the street, that we have no value and worth. And we're starting to find that out. And there's a lot of transgender people that are starting to fight and really get involved and get evolved. But there's also some of us that are working like doing the best that we can to really be visible and really raise the consciousness of how much we've been through and how we're doing the best that we can. But we need help. We need more people to help bring us out, to raise us up, and to to support us in moving forward in life, because a lot of us are still stuck in the trauma from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s, and the current trauma, you know what I mean?
And it plays itself out, right? It
Yeah.
plays itself out inside. Yeah, absolutely.
And I just made 50, and I don't, it's only by the grace of God that I'm here. It's,
All right.
because I often share that living in Florida, I was physically attacked at least 25 times from the time that I mean, to the point where somebody has knocked me out, stabbed me, cut me, shot at me, or just beat me, solely based on the fact of being transgender. And how do I move forward with that?
Absolutely.
That is so powerful, Janetta. That is so good. Yeah, I mean, I was struck by what you said a while ago, that the trans community has been so beaten down, we can't even articulate what our goals should be. But I think being super clear, first with ourselves and then with others, like you just were, about what we're after. I mean, it's not enough for the LGBT movement's transgender work to be, how can we eliminate the most horrific forms of violence against transgender people in prisons or detention facilities? No, I mean, it needs to be about how can we embrace as a society, and through law, through government programs, through social support, through laws and policies, embrace transgender people as fully equal, respected, participating members of society, starting from when they're children. One of those goals should be, there should not be one transgender young person in the juvenile justice system. There shouldn't be any young person in the juvenile justice system. But we could stop. That could be a goal. That could be a goal.
Yeah.
And to have that embraced by the big LGBT organizations and have it be front and center, I think would be so powerful.
Very powerful.
And one of the things I would like to see immediately is there's a National Trans Day of Action on November 18th that I would love to see every national LGBT organization participate in. Mine happens to be supporting that, the National LGBTQ Task Force, but I would like to see every organization really be supportive of that and come out on that day, because we're taking it to the streets, because we are tired of being second-class citizens. And so we're, besides doing our typical TDOR, Trans Day of Remembrance, on the 20th, on the 18th, we're tired of it. So we're saying, okay, we want action. So then we're taking it to the streets and doing action. So we want everybody to do an action.
All right. We do want everyone to do an action.
I just say
And
one
part of
thing?
that is I also want to tee up some questions from the audience, because I know that folks have stuff to say, and I guess I've got some questions from Twitter. Do we have questions from the audience on the mics while I look at these? Great, perfect.
Hi, thank you for being here and for engaging us in this conversation. I have a question that's particularly directed at Shannon, but I'd be interested to hear what all of you have to say about it. I found that recently, in cases that have addressed transgender prisoners and their access to hormone therapy and sex reassignment surgery, courts have seemed very hesitant to describe gender identity disorder as a serious medical need in order for it to have a right to medical treatment under the Eighth Amendment. And what I've noticed is that courts tend to wait until a very severe act is involved, typically genital mutilation or attempted suicide, and that seems incredibly problematic to me. So I'm wondering if you've encountered that in your litigation and what your thoughts are about it.
Yeah, definitely encounter that all the time. The case that Rashad referred to, the trans woman in that case had asked for help more than 70 times and then eventually was never given any help. Eventually attempted to remove her own genitalia and almost bled to death. And only at that point, we were able to get a court to order, and the prison wanted to give her testosterone, so we were able to get the court to order her to give her estrogen, but that was like just a few years ago, and how could that be the first case where somebody actually got an injunction that required the prison to take immediate action? I mean, the problem is, look, the Federal Bureau of Prisons now, thanks to advocacy on the part of a lot of people, has on paper a fine policy about the necessity of providing medical care to transgender people, but they don't do it. Nobody follows it. I mean, part of the challenge of doing any kind of prison reform work.
What kind of teeth does that policy have? Like, what's the accountability mechanism?
None. There's none. In order, you have individual prisoners have to bring lawsuits in order to have any hope of getting that policy enforced, and that is not a realistic way to achieve change. That's why, again, we need more deep-seated social change of the type that Kylar and Janetta are working for and talking about.
I've got a question from Facebook about the war on drugs and asking particularly, is that part of the reason why trans folks of color in particular are targeted within the criminal justice system?
I think transgender people are just targeted just solely based on being transgender.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think so. I don't think it has anything to do with drugs.
I want to push back a little bit, only because, I find this question interesting because I don't necessarily know if this is, if it's a prevailing reason, but one of the first question that local law enforcement have to answer when they apply for federal funds is, have you increased drug arrest? Not how have you increased drug arrest, not where have those drug arrests come from, not any disaggregation of the data. So in fact, if they have not increased drug arrests, that impacts whether or not they get federal funds or whether or not they get more federal funds. It's what drives stop and frisk. It's what drives so many of these policies. And, who gets targeted under that? They're not going to go to rich communities. They're not going to go to rich communities to increase drug arrests. If I am a sheriff and I have to increase drug arrests, I'm going to go to the most vulnerable communities, the communities with less power. Now, this might not be the only reason, but the fact of the matter is that right now our federal government is incentivizing the targeting of certain communities in order to help local law enforcement get more money to buy tanks or whatever.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think generally on people of color it is a war on drugs, but I really have to agree with Janetta. I think just we look different, and if we look different, we're targeted.
And that's why we have to do grassroots reentry program, because we don't want the federal government involved in anything. We want to be there to support our people and not have to report to the federal government about if they relapsed or whatever the situation might be, or they might have done a petty crime. We want to make sure that we support our people and be there for them and help them really move forward and not allow one little situation that happens while on probation or while on whatever, send them back to prison.
And so what you're talking about specifically is when organizations receive federal funds for direct service, there's a lot of reporting that happens. If you're actually working with someone that may have a drug addiction and something has to get reported back, it then impacts their ability to maybe receive other funds. It may impact their probation or parole, and it makes it harder to actually do direct service in these situations. That's
right, and get them kicked out of housing situation.
Absolutely.
I mean,
I'm feeling guilty. I just want to add up to that question. It is important to have that policy on the books, and I realize I should say that. And I also should say that the President Obama's administration has been so much more receptive than anyone in the history of our country to trying to make things better for LGBT people in prisons. And good things are happening. It's just that the system itself and those prisons themselves are so entrenched and so brutal. It is such an uphill battle to make change.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is the policy.
It matters.
But we need greater accountability so that it's enforced.
and they're not, because they're not enforcing the policies that have already been implemented. And how do we do that?
Right.
Maybe we'll switch that out.
Hi, my name is Marco, and thank you so much for your expertise. And I'm part of the undocumented community, and so when I look at this, I look at it under the lens of immigration. And so I'm really concerned about talking about undocumented trans women in the over 240 detention facilities that are housed in for-profit prisons across the country. And so talking a little bit about their unique obstacles when they're trapped in these dysfunctional detention systems, and how they're exposed to solitary confinement and tortured. If you could just touch on those points, I think that would be very interesting.
Thank you. I mean, the detention centers have even less accountability than our prisons and our jails. And when you overlay the for-profit nature of these institutions, where the bottom line is not about any type of rehabilitation, even though our federal prison system that's not for profit doesn't really think about reentry either. So let's talk some about what's happening, because we are in the midst of this national conversation around immigration reform. We just had an election, and these issues around an LGBT movement, and particularly a GLB movement that's seeing a lot of success on certain issues, and you've got a lot of intersectional challenges when you think about a prison industrial complex that continues to grow and intersect with the immigration movement that may be a bit stalled right now.
Well, it's a tough road because they don't have the same rights if they're confined. There's no due process rights at all. I did read, and I didn't get to finish reading it. I know President Obama has proposed something. Did you get to read
Yeah, it would
that?
move about 7 million of the 8 million that was part of the Senate bill.
Right, detainees, but, and Shannon, did you?
Well, I mean, we have an immigration project. We've had it for 21 years.
Which you started, by the way.
Thanks, buddy. And the worst cases that we get, and the highest number of calls that we get are for trans women, undocumented trans women being held in detention facilities and subject to basically torture. It's just torture. And in fact, for the first time, just like 2 days ago, there was a contingent from the U.S. went to Geneva to the UN Commission that supervises or monitors countries' compliance with the Convention Against Torture, and made a presentation on behalf of trans women, undocumented trans women held in detention facilities. And I think the commission took it very seriously, and then asked the U.S. State Department what was their response, how are they dealing with that problem. I mean, and that would be another thing. It would be great.
Was there a response?
The U.S. responded today, and I do not know whether they addressed that issue or not, but we should see if they did. But wouldn't it have been great if every national LGBT organization was there with them, supporting them and shining a light on that issue?
Because they keep ignoring the request for us when we make them about the trans women in detention. And so it'll be interesting. I'm sorry to hear what their response is.
Have we identified any strategies or any tactics that work sort of in those moments, whether they be really specific to an individual case or they be more macro? Is there anything that we've seen?
Well, I think our hands are tied, because what strategy is there? I mean,
well, look, we should be demanding, this administration, any administration, nobody should be being tortured in U.S.-run detention facilities. And right now, trans women, and it's mostly trans women of color, are being tortured as we sit here in detention facilities. And, they could not put them in detention facilities. There's no reason. There's alternatives, like you are talking about. There's never any legitimate reason to put a transgender woman in a U.S. detention facility, given the horrific, torturous conditions that we know that individual will face.
It's the LGBT movement, the immigration rights movement, neither one of these movements are unfamiliar with taking issues to the streets, of disrupting political flow in order to make a point. And this may be one of those moments where there is direct action that's needed to maybe elevate and highlight this issue.
it goes back to what Janetta said, though. People aren't taking the direct action, and we really need that direct action. Not to take away from the question here, but we need that direct action.
Hello, my name is Octavia Lewis. I just like to keep it on the I perspective. For me, when we talk about the prison industrial complex, to me it seems reactionary. And what I mean by reactionary is what are the procedures in place for women like myself that trying to get in the doors at certain organizations so that we can be vocal, so that we can have a voice. But yet when we get there, we are met with oppression from other people that are LGBT and people that are supposed to be our allies. So my question is, you say we're not visual, but think about the oppressions that us as women of color face every day, just here in this city. When you think about there are over 1,500 transgender women, there are only 350 beds for LGBT youth in this city. So when you talk about that, that is when you start to see the root cause of things, where you see that it is not just the aftermath, but it is beforehand, and it shows where systematic oppression has its hands in things. Because me, as a woman of trans experience, that has been homeless, that has had to be, that has worked in commercialized sex work, that has done a 360 and tried to change things and make things better for other women of color like myself, it is not easy when you go to these LGBT organizations. And it's not that we're not qualified, because I have an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's, and working on a doctorate in public health. So please don't tell us that there are not any qualified women of trans experience that are of color, because to me it is problematic when we do go to these places and we ask for help. And they look at us and they say, oh, well, you're good, you can go pass out our condoms for us. But we're not good enough to sit at your board table. We're not good enough to be in your upper management. We're not good enough to help you make what is called best practices for us. These are things in which you say, oh, well, these are best practices for you. But you never had to run from the police. But you never had to suck a dick on the corner to get a meal. You never had to sleep with several men in one night to try to afford a place to have a roof over your head to get outside of the elements. So for people that are in places that make these decisions, that have no idea of the struggles that women of color, especially women of trans experience, face, that is problematic. So for me, I would like to see more women of color, especially of trans experience, that are allowed to sit at the round table, that are allowed to eat the full-course meals and not the scraps of the oppressor. So for me, I challenge all those that have the power to make change, to really bring about a change, and not just talk about it, because we're going to be here next year, and the year after, and the year after, and the year after, still spinning the wheel. So for my thing is, let's not reinvent the wheel, let's just make it a little bit stronger.
All right. All right. No movement for justice can win or be powerful if the folks who are impacted are not at the center and are not, making the calls. And so thank you for that. I want to end on this one last question to you all and sort of give you all an opportunity to sort of, take us out and take us home, and also respond to the last comments as well. What will it take to get the LGBT movement, the whole movement, to make criminal justice policies central in the queer agenda?
I'm just concerned that nobody suffers the way the T suffers. I mean, and I realize, to me, there's levels of poor treatment. And I just feel like nobody suffers the way that transgender women, specifically transgender women of color. I mean, and I'm just concerned that I'll go back to affirmative action. We need equal access, and we haven't had that. You know what I mean? We haven't had that. So the only thing I could think of is equal access, affirmative action. And when I say affirmative action, I don't mean actual affirmative action, but something that sort of kind of looks like that to raise the transgender community up. We need help coming up. There's very few of us doing this work, and it's just like we need help. We need more support, and we want our sisters and our brothers to help us. It's just like we don't just want it to be us. We want more, but we have to provide the services so people can get well. in terms of dealing with past pain, past trauma, current trauma, and just, I don't know, it's just, we need support. And I think there needs to be a larger community, part of the community, especially the G and the L and the B. Yeah, we need more help. Yeah.
I'll tag onto that and respond. It's sort of like Octavia's question. They're tied together. I think that, yeah, and it's really what Janetta is saying. We need to build community in large mass. We're divided all across the country, and I hope there's some way that we can do that. And I do feel like people of color are separated out more. And if we could figure out a way to build a large mass, I do feel like there's a class stratification in some way, and it's very apparent in our system. And if we could find a way to heal that divide, we'd be a much stronger movement. But I do feel like that folks are left behind. It's a very American way. Once I've got mine, I've forgotten about what you need. And I really wish that we in this movement wouldn't be like that, but it's very clear that we are. And I have that fear too, that once marriage is done, there's no more investment in the movement or what trans people need. And I have said that as long as I've been in the trans movement. Let's also not be forgetful of race, but we have forgotten it and moved long past it as soon as I said those words. And then we've set up a strata that has ended up here. And I know we're out of time, but I still think it's important for us to be mindful of that we need to retool and relook at that. And this is a good place to push that pause button, because even though Laverne is on the cover of Time and Walking and we're visible, we still have a lot of work to do to heal this community and the harm that's in this community and the divisions in this community. And we need everybody to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way we're going to make criminal justice issues front and center if we realize we can't do that in isolation from opening up the composition of the leadership and the values of the leadership in the LGBT movement, including the groups with the most funding. And if, per that last question, if we're not just looking at what happens to people once they're in the criminal justice system, but our goal, clearly articulated, needs to be keep people out of the criminal justice system and make sure people have families and health care and jobs and safety. And we need to just care about each other and love each other. Yeah.
There's a lot of work to do. Thank you all for joining us and for having this conversation, for being engaged on social media, for sitting and listening to these wonderful panelists and hearing their words and their vision and their stories. Can we give them another round of applause? I want to thank the Arcus Foundation, all the sponsors. I'm going to take a moderator's privilege and give a special shout out to Andy Mara, my former colleague from GLAAD, who drove the train here, and all the other folks who helped make this event possible and a success. Thank you all. This is just a moment in time on the movement towards making this world and making the systems that judge us and protect us and give us hope and power in our society better. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Rashad.
Yes.
Thank you.